Ultra Instinct Omen Goku and Vegito Blue are two of the strongest forms we've ever seen in Dragon Ball Super, but they exist at completely different points in the series. Vegito Blue was born in the Zamasu Arc, a fusion so powerful that he overwhelmed Fused Zamasu, who had already merged with an immortal god that rivaled Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken Goku and Blue Vegeta combined. His strength was so overwhelming that even Zamasu with infinite regeneration was on the very verge of being erased completely. Ultra Instinct Goku, on the other hand, didn't show up until the Tournament of Power. Even in his incomplete state, however, it allowed Goku to react, dodge, and counter Jiren, a character who surpassed the God of Destruction and whose power rivaled or exceeded anything we've seen up until that point. The question is, if Ultra Instinct Omen Goku had existed during the Zamasu arc, would it have been enough to replace Vegito Blue as the trump card? Or does Vegito Blue's raw power output and fusion multiplier completely outclass UI Omen's in complete form? Ever since the very beginning of Dragon Ball Super, Goku has been established as a fighter operating on an absurdly high level. Back in the Battle of Gods arc, his clash with Beerus was enough to endanger the entire macrocosm of Universe 7, a structure that isn't just one universe but a layered cosmology. The living world, the afterlife, and even the Kaioshin realm all exist within it, and each is so vast that only divine techniques such as Kai Kai or Whis' staff allow for travel in between them. And yet, Goku is shaking all of that with his first taste of god power. As the story continued, we witnessed other examples of this kind of cosmic influence. Zamasu, for instance, spreads his will across the entirety of Trunks' future timeline, a corruption so overwhelming that it fell even in the presence of Whis and Beerus themselves. Fast forward to the Tournament of Power, we meet Jiren, someone explicitly stated to surpass every opponent the Z Fighters had ever faced. Even while suppressing himself, Jiren casually stared down Goku's massive Universe 7 Spirit Bomb. That attack had been fueled by Kaioken x 20 Super Saiyan Blue Goku, an energy so terrifying that the gods of destruction reacted in fear, and even the Grand Prix showed concern for Zeno's safety. In the anime's original draft, the Spirit Bomb scene was even more brutal. Jiren physically shoved it back to Goku, who could do nothing but desperately try to contain the blast before being swallowed whole by it. In that moment, on the brink of annihilation, Goku's body erupted. His limits burst wide open in a way Kaioken could never achieve, unlocking what fans came to call Ultra Instinct Omen, and the sheer pressure of this awakening rattled the entire world of Void. Now, the world of Void isn't just some tiny area, it's described as an infinite timeless expanse. Stories in Japanese media often feature these eternal Void realms, so when the Void was stated to tremble from Goku's power, there are a few ways you can interpret it. Maybe his energy was resonating across infinite space, maybe he was shaking the dimensional structure that contains the Void, or maybe it was a more literal distortion of its very fabric. Regardless, the implication is enormous. Omen's raw output had essentially infinite reach. With this power, Goku immediately outclassed warriors who had previously been major threats. Fighters like Hit and Vegeta couldn't even stand in his way. He adopted a fluid, almost alien combat style that no one had seen before. And this was just the first taste of the form. Later, what some call Omen 2 emerges as a much stronger state as the tournament progresses. To put this into perspective, take Goku's fight with Kefla. As a Super Saiyan Blue, he actually tanked a kick from her that Whis noted to surpass the power of the Spirit Bomb itself. And keep in mind that Goku had layered Kaioken on top of Blue during that clash. Kefla didn't stop there either. She transformed into a Super Saiyan 2, a multiplier that stacks on top of everything else. Even at the low ball end, that's at least doubling of her power, though in other interpretations it could be closer to a 20 times increase depending on what guidebook or source you prefer. Scaling this begins to get a bit tricky, as there are multiple ways to interpret the transformations. Some sources describe Super Saiyan 2 as only twice as Super Saiyan 1, while others imply it's exponentially greater, referencing Trunks' ascendant state. Grade 3, for example, was stated to be 10 times stronger than Grade 2 and yet still inferior in practicality due to its drawbacks. From that chain, you could argue that Super Saiyan 2 sits far above a 10 times multiplier. The point here isn't to nail down one rigid number, however, just to illustrate the general range of Goku's insane growth. And that's really where this discussion leads. Depending on how you interpret the statement, scaling gods and multipliers, Goku's feats can fluctuate in magnitude. But regardless of whether you go with the conservative estimates or the highballed ones, the conclusion is the same. Goku's Ultra Instinct Omen catapulted him into an entirely new plane of power, one that left his previous godly forms in the dust. When we really break it down, Ultra Instinct Omen's second stage ends up being dozens, if not hundreds of times stronger than Goku's early Super Saiyan Blue during the Tournament of Power. And the math behind that comes from the Spirit Bomb, which was already built on Goku's Kaioken x 20 and then enhanced further by the nature of the Genki itself. Goku, Beerus, and even other gods of destruction acknowledge that the Spirit Bomb massively outclasses Kaioken x 20. Yet even that isn't enough. Jiren, still not fighting at his maximum, handled it with ease. The wave of his ki was described as unlike anything seen in the tournament up to that point. Shortly after, Jiren himself acknowledges that Goku is growing stronger with every clash. That means that Goku, just with his base arsenal outside of the limit-breaking category, had already surpassed his earlier Ultra Instinct Omen showing. Some people debate whether Kaioken counts as limit-breaking, but the real point is that Omen was set apart as something even beyond those temporary amps. Meanwhile, Vegeta takes on a Jiren who Goku describes as beyond anything he's ever faced. Vegeta even convinces himself his final flash could bring Jiren down, which tells you how absurdly strong Jiren was in that moment. Goku later clarifies that Jiren's presence eclipsed anything felt before, though whether he was talking about the punch that scared him out of blue or the beating in base is debatable. Either way, this Jiren was casually stronger than the version of Kefla who nearly killed Omen 2 Goku with a single blast. From there, Vegeta evolves into his evolution blue state while Goku presses Kaioken times 20. Stacked together, that already puts them more than 20 times above enraged Kefla, forcing Jiren to ramp up again. Belmod even comments that he hasn't seen Jiren draw on this much power in ages, providing the fight was finally pushing him. Still, Jiren's aura alone blows away the combined assault of Goku, Vegeta, and 17. It takes 17 sacrifice to keep the two Saiyans alive. Vegeta, battered and unable to go into Super Saiyan, rises again purely on resolve, thinking of Bulma, Trunks, Kaba, and his promises and trusts everything to Goku. That transfer of faith is what lets Goku rise once more, blue burning brighter from the willpower Vegeta lends him. Krillin even remarks on it like it's a whole new level, though he quickly points out that even with his power-up, Goku still couldn't compare to Jiren. Jiren crushes him easily, but the key takeaway is that this defeat becomes a spark Jiren wanted. He, like any true martial artist, pushes his opponent to unlock everything hidden inside. The whole tournament had been hinting at this fact, that Goku had another wall to break, and then, at the edge of defeat, Goku finally snaps into what's often called Omen 3. The anime at the time labeled the episode Ultra Instinct Mastered, which is partially why the white-haired form took on that title later. In reality, this stage was Goku refining the technique mid-battle, learning to wield instinct itself more deliberately. Vegeta had just told Belmod about the Saiyans' endless growth, and their talent for shattering limits, and sure enough, Goku delivers. Jiren, pressured, is forced to finally reveal his hidden strength, so overwhelming that Belmod himself crumbles before it, admitting that if Jiren loses, nothing else matters. Now, when trying to pin down how strong Vegito Blue was in the Goku Black arc, the best place to start isn't the fusion itself, but the two warriors who built the foundation, Goku and Vegeta. Their power levels shift rapidly across the storyline, so rather than dissecting the entire saga beat by beat, it's smarter to look at who they were right before the Batara earrings came into play. By their return trip to the ruined future, Vegeta's growth was the clearest to measure. After being beaten down twice by Goku Black and discovering the truth behind his enemy's stolen body, Vegeta locked himself away in the hyperbolic time chamber. 6 months of grueling training later, the result was staggering. His power output literally ripped the chamber apart when he exited, something few others had ever managed. Once back in the future, Vegeta immediately challenged Black, and the difference was night and day. Techniques that once overwhelmed him no longer had any bite. Vegeta easily swatted aside the energy blade, tanked counters, and slammed Black around the battlefield. At one point, he straight up hurled him through a skyscraper while mocking him for being an unworthy thief who could never truly wield Goku's strength. For the first time, Black was on the defensive, but that humiliation ended up feeding directly into Black's evolution. Saiyans grow through emotion, and his fury at being overpowered by mere mortals became fuel. Out of this came his infamous Scythe, an energy weapon sharp enough to tear through the boundaries of space itself. And even worse, it could spawn clones of Black, even dangerously competent in battle, strong enough to wound Goku and Vegeta themselves. The chaos gave him the opening to regroup with future Zamasu, who had just narrowly escaped the Mafuba. Realizing the mortals were far too troublesome to face alone, the two deities fused and unleashed Merge Zamasu. This fusion flipped the script. The new being overwhelmed Super Saiyan Blue Goku and Vegeta with casual ease, while Trunks in his rage form fared no better. Yet despite this hopelessness, the Saiyans' drive to adapt wouldn't fade. Vegeta declared their limitless growth as a race, and he and both Goku dug deeper momentarily, pushing Zamasu back in flashes of defiance. Together with Trunks, they even managed a father-son Gallic Gun that briefly overpowered one of Zamasu's surging attacks. Still, Zamasu escalated further, unleashing light spears and energy halos that battered the Saiyans relentlessly. Vegeta even endured one of the god's most devastating barrages head-on to shield his son. Goku, beaten nearly unconscious, eventually rose to fire a Kamehameha in a final desperate clash, holding his ground against Zamasu's defiant assault. Now, when you look at Goku's progression here, it almost seems erratic. Unlike Vegeta, his only formal training after the second future trip was learning the Mafuba technique. Beyond that, his gains came from recovery and experience, the classic Zenkai boost of Saiyan biology. But the speed at which his strength shot up was extreme, even for him. It's less about new skill and more about how fast his body adapted to the punishment. Meanwhile, Goku and Vegeta pushed their limits further than before, and with Trunks, they even launched a father-son Gallic Gun. But then Goku re-enters the fight, and this is where the power scaling goes completely off of the rails. Goku outright claims he's going to unleashes full strength, and in the blink of an eye, the same fused Zamasu who had been wiping the floor with him is suddenly deadlocked in a beam struggle. Goku channels everything into a Kamehameha, shattering both his arms from the strain, yet somehow manages to overpower Zamasu's holy wrath, burning half of his face into a twisted, corrupted mess. Keep in mind that the same fusion who previously dominated the trio, somehow mid-battle, Goku scales himself up to where he can match a Potara fusion. You can chalk it up to narrative convenience or inconsistent scaling, but either way, Goku refuses to stay down. Even with both arms and later his leg snapped, he still taps into Blue Kaioken for one final blow that slams Zamasu into the ground. Unfortunately, it empties his tank completely. Zamasu, furious at being humiliated by the mortals, lashes out, literally striking himself with divine lightning. This mutated body warping his arm and granting him even more dangerous surges of power. At this point, the heroes realize that the only option left is fusion. After healing up with the Sensu Bean and getting the rundown from Gowasu, Goku and Vegeta fuse into Vegito once more. Now, looking at the manga's version sheds some light on just how insane Potara is in terms of raw output. Instead of testing him out in base as he's done previously, Vegito jumps straight into blue. That could imply that his base wasn't sufficient enough to damage Zamasu, unlike in the manga, or that he simply wanted to cut to the chase and not waste precious fusion time. Honestly, both arguments hold pretty good weight. Regardless, the gap initially is very staggering. Shin even speculates that Vegito might have surpassed Beerus, but the Beerus skill doesn't hold too much weight in the anime, which we'll talk about in a later. When the clash finally kicks off, Vegito and fused Zamasu are evenly matched, trading devastating blows in battle far closer than Vegito stomping a Buhan back in Dragon Ball Z. During the clash, Vegito doesn't just steamroll Zamasu, he actually has to defend, block, and trade blows. What keeps him slightly ahead isn't just raw strength, but his mastery of tactics. For example, he pretends to be knocked down from a heavy punch just to bait Zamasu and land a spirit sword clean through his chest, even mocking him while doing so. Naturally, this humiliation makes Zamasu snap. His anger pushes him into a new transformation, his body swells up, and his aura intensifies. Overall, his presence becomes much more imposing as well. This form clearly amplifies his power, and it comes at a drawback. The added bulk slows him down. This is where Vegito's smaller frame and superior agility let him cut through Zamasu's defenses and overwhelm him with sheer speed. Eventually, Vegito fires off his final Kamehameha at near point-blank range, stating that he'd be launching it at full power when he decides to do so. Despite the devastating impact, Zamasu emerges practically untouched, rising from the attack as if it were nothing. Vegito manages to land one final punch afterwards, though it seems as though Vegito is growing stronger as the fight goes on, since one of his punches towards the end when he defuses does more damage to Zamasu's face than his final Kamehameha at point-blank range. However, after this punch, the Potara fusion suddenly spills, ending the fight prematurely. Now with the scaling out of the way, let's talk about how this battle would actually go down realistically. At the start of the episode, the God of Universe 5 comments on how powerful the Spirit Bomb's energy is, and the Kaioshin of Universe 1 notes that Jiren is still far from showing his full strength. Whis immediately confirms this and then follows up by acknowledging how overwhelming Jiren already is. That's important because Shin himself was present during the fight between Merge Zamasu and Vegito Blue. Many people tend to dismiss Shin's statements as unreliable, but often for the wrong reasons. The main argument comes from how he behaved in the Buu saga, where he did get some things wrong, such as underestimating the base Saiyans at the time or thinking that fusion was always permanent unless you were a deity. But if we break that down, Shin's mistakes back then were mostly due to what he didn't know, not because he wasn't competent. For example, he was absolutely correct that Majin Buu was a universal threat, but he underestimated the Saiyans because in his lifetime he had never encountered mortals of that caliber. From his perspective, Babbi's minions were already terrifying, so his error was really a lack of information rather than poor judgment. That same logic applies in Dragon Ball Super. When Shin compares Jiren's suppressed power to beings he's already sensed, that isn't a prediction. It's a statement rooted in what he directly perceives. He's not automatically wrong just because of misjudgments he's made in the past based off of estimation. As for the Potara situation, Shin didn't even know the full details until Elder Kai explained it to him, so he wasn't wrong out of incompetence. If anything, Elder Kai deserves the blame. In reality, the time limit expansion was more of a super retcon introduced to prevent Goku and Vegeta from staying fused permanently, which would have ruined future storylines. Now, regarding Shin's statement on Jiren, there are two ways you can interpret it. One is that he was suggesting that since this was a fraction of Jiren's real power, Jiren's full strength would surpass anything Shin has ever sensed before. Or he was speaking strictly about the suppressed Jiren he sensed in that moment, which would still put him above Vegito Blue. If you go with the second interpretation, then even Ultra Instinct Omen Goku in his first stage might be able to defeat Vegito Blue, since Vegito would be forced to burn through so much power that he would inevitably defuse, if not just lose outright. However, if you think that Shin was estimating Jiren's full power and was accurate in this assessment, Omen 3 Goku would beat him as he surpassed Jiren during the end of the Tournament of Power. Realistically though, Vegito Blue would struggle against Omen Goku as early as the second stage, and by that point it's very hard to argue he could win, with the most likely scenario being him losing to Omen 1 Goku even before Goku's energy wears off. And the only way Vegito Blue would be able to pull off a win would be if Goku's Omen form had ran out. Now, when it comes to the Dragon Ball Super manga, the comparison between Ultra Instinct Omen Goku and Vegito Blue is heavily one-sided in Vegito's favor. V-Jump outright stated that Vegito Blue was operating on the level of Beerus, and even Shin himself questioned if that was truly the case. Back in 2017, at Napoli Comic-Con, Toritaro was asked directly about this matchup. When questioned on whether Beerus or Vegito Blue was stronger, his response was this. As Kaioshin indicated in the last chapter of the manga, it could be that Vegito Blue has surpassed Beerus' power, but for now it is unknown if this is true or not. Now, while that statement leaves room for interpretation, the implication is clear. Vegito Blue's power rivals Beerus at the very least. That alone is an achievement far beyond what Omen Goku ever showed in the manga. Even in the current storyline, after Gohan Beast and Master Ultra Instinct Goku pushed themselves to the limit, it's still made clear that Goku hasn't surpassed Beerus. Not even close. In fact, Black Frieza is only said to be approaching the level of a god of destruction, while Vegito Blue is portrayed as outright rivaling. With all of this evidence stacked together, the conclusion is simple. In the manga, Vegito Blue comes out as the definitive winner, and in the anime, Omen Goku likely wins 9 times out of 10.